Hey guys, this is Woodshop Junkies, and today I'm going to jump back in with making the most of my small shop with a few very simple to make tool organizers. A couple of weeks ago I posted a video on these 9 simple and straightforward shop organizers that I made using mostly scrap and off-cut wood. The intention was to make storage and organizer units to store the more often used items in my shop that I often find myself having to look for when I want to use it. Things like my drill chucky. These units included the storage and organization with easy access of things like the variety of tapes I use in my shop, safety glasses, hammers, pencils and markers, and a couple of other things. If you missed that one, I will drop a link down below in the description of this video where you can check it out. If you watched it, you may remember me mentioning that I had more projects planned than just this 9 but couldn't get to them due to time. So today I want to finish off the remainder of the shop organizers. Before I get into today's video, I want to take a moment to thank my channel sponsor and the sponsor of this video, UPAT SA. UPAT SA being the official local distributor of Fischer and Stabila products. I have personally been using Fischer wall plugs for more than 10 years, and more recently the Fischer Duo plug, and can vouch for their superior holding power. But if you guys want to know more about the product or about the supplier, you can check out all the relevant links in the description of this video. So first up is the variety of spring clamps I have in my shop. I think most woodworkers have a whole bunch of these because they are fairly inexpensive and are quite handy when you need an extra hand. Now, normally storing them is as easy as just clamping them wherever I find a space, but today I want to make a dedicated unit to group them together within arm's reach. So for my spring clamp storage, I'm going to start with a MDF base, nothing too complicated. It's a little bit thinner than 3/4 inch, it's about 16 millimeters, and I already fixed the cleat at the back so I can suspend the assembled unit from my French cleat wall. But this is obviously not a requirement. The assembled unit can be fixed straight to a wall and be a wall mount storage unit. Then onto the backing, I'm going to install 3 pieces of 1/4 inch or 6mm MDF like this, that I will be able to clamp the spring clamps on like that and keep all of them on the unit together and organized. Now to fix the 1/4 inch MDF pieces to the backboard, I could put them like this or like this, but I figured for comfort and convenience, I'm going to put it at a 45-degree angle like that. So I added a chamfer to the MDF pieces with my table saw so that I can install them flush against the backing and give me that 45-degree angle. And to add strength and stability to this piece, I cut up a whole bunch of these little MDF triangles using my miter saw, nothing too complicated, and I'm going to install them over here. I wanted a 3-tier rack so I would be able to group together the different size spring clamps I have. And to make it easier to put together, I pre-assembled each tier of my spring clamp rack using glue and nails. So just before I fix the clamp racks onto the backing, I also made these 2 pieces of 1/4 inch MDF and I rounded these edges on my belt sander. This is just cosmetic, and once the clamp racks are fixed to the backing, I'm going to install them on the sides of the unit like this, just to round it off, make it look a bit nicer, and once everything is assembled, I'm going to give it a coat of paint and I can get it on the wall. I glued each tier to the backing and would further secure it with nails when the sides are installed. Right, so that's the spring clamp stored and organized and available when I want to use it. Next up is these power tool wrenches. I've got a whole bunch of different ones that were supplied with some of my power tools and designed specifically with the dimension of the tool in mind. Things like changing the blade on my table saw or changing a bit on my trim router. So I want to keep these around stored and organized as well. Right, so for this one I'm using a very simple tried and tested concept. Once again, I started with a normal backing that I cut up. This time I'm using plywood and I attached the cleat so I can use it with my cleat wall. Then I drove a bunch of nails into the backing using the width of a ruler to make sure that I'm driving them all at the same depth and also more or less in line. Now I drove the nails more towards the top of the backing and I made the backing a little bit wider so that when the tool is on the peg it is supported instead of just dangling in the air like that. Now generally I'm not a big fan of having nails protruding from an object, especially in a small workshop like mine where moving around can be restricted sometimes, and I don't want to risk nicking my clothes or even my flesh on one of these nails when I'm moving around close to the organizer. So to prevent this from happening, I cut up a piece of plexiglass that I'm going to be installing over the nails like that, with a space large enough so I can get the tool in and over the nail. The plexiglass I'm using is not extremely thick, but cutting this can be a little bit tricky with a table saw. So what I did is I set my blade only slightly higher than the piece of plexiglass, and my feed needed to be constant. Not too slow so it won't melt the plexiglass, but also not too fast so it doesn't chip out. To secure the plexiglass in place, I'm going to add these pieces on the side of the unit like this so the glass can go on the top. To the side pieces I added a chamfered or a tapered cut over here, but this is just cosmetic. And to make the tapered cut I used my taper cutting jig. If you missed the video on that one, I will drop the link down below if you want to check it out. I installed a small divider in the center, but this was more to support the plexiglass so it doesn't bow in. Good, now all the wrenches and odd bobs I use with my machines are stored and organized. Next up is my clamps, and I will be the first to admit that my clamp collection is, well, not that good, but these are still the clamps I use in my shop and I need them stored and organized and available when I want to use them. Now the quickest and easiest way I figured I could build a clamp rack is to build a magazine using 40mm PVC pipe into which I can insert my clamps. This concept is nothing new and I'm pretty certain you guys have seen it somewhere on the internet before, but I figured I'd put my own little twist on it. So I cut up a few pieces of PVC piping using my miter saw, and to give me the ability to mount these in certain places in my shop and store my clamps in them, I created this box into which I'm going to install the pipes, very similar to my pencil and marker storage I did in my previous video. And this will form my very simple clamp rack. Now, to install the pipes with a uniform spacing, I drilled a hole for each pipe using a matching fastener or flush base bit about halfway through the 3/4 inch piece of plywood. The pipes are now going to be installed into these holes, which will cradle them and keep them in place. I then drilled a second, slightly smaller hole all the way through. As for the purpose of the mismatched holes, it is to create a little bit of a shoulder that will retain the PVC pipes once the box is assembled, but allow me access to the inside of the pipe to insert my clamps when I want to store it. So this is almost what the finished product is going to look like. I'm going to finish it off now by running a flush trim bit around the inside of each hole to match it with the inside of the pipe. Then a chamfer at the opening of each hole to act as a lead-in when inserting my clamps, and I'm going to finish it off by giving it a quick sand. Right, so that's pretty much what the rack is going to look like, and I quite like the versatility of this design. I can make as many units as I want, or as my clamp collection grows, and I hope it will, I can make more units and mount them wherever I may need them. Also like the fact that the unit can be mounted vertically or horizontally and still have the same amount of functionality. So I figured I'm going to utilize a space that I've been wasting up until now, which is the back of my garage door. When choosing the mounting place of the rack on the garage door, I needed to consider the weight of the clamps and how this would affect the opening and closing of the door. So I needed to find a fairly decent balance point. Right, so that's the clamp stored, organized and out of the way. Next I'm going to make a general use shelf that I can make a few of and place all over my workshop, maybe even against my workbench, and use it to store things like consumables, things that don't have a set position or place in my shop. I once again started with a piece of plywood backing, and to create a shelf I simply screwed and glued on a second piece of plywood. Now for this one I'm not going to go into a crazy amount of detail because it's fairly straightforward, but at this point the shelf is actually quite strong and should support the weight of whatever I want to place on it. But I'm going to make it a bit stronger by adding some sides to help support the shelf area over here, and then add a trim piece on the front just to act as a retainer so that whatever is stored on the shelf doesn't just drop off if I had to bump up against it. For the sides I used 1/2 inch plywood that I sized up with my miter saw. And for the front I used 1/4 inch MDF. Plywood would most likely have looked better, but like I said, I'm using scraps and offcuts. Right guys, so next up is my chisels, and just like my clamps, I am due for an upgrade. But I want to get these stored and organized anyway for two reasons. Firstly, I know where they are when I want to use them, and secondly, storing a chisel properly prolongs its life by protecting its edge. So for my chisel storage, I once again started with an MDF back. I'm not too concerned about the mismatch of materials. I'm going to be painting it anyway. And to save some time, I've already fixed the cleat at the back so I can use it with my cleat wall, and installed two sides like this. The sides are nothing complicated. The most unique thing about them is the chamfered or tapered cut over here that I added with my taper cutting jig once again. To store the chisels, I want to install these planks onto the backing with a slight gap between them to create a slot. The slot is where I will insert the chisel when I want to store it, but I don't like the fact that the chisel can freely move within the slot, so I want to create little cradles for each chisel. To create the cradles, I'm going to sandwich the two planks around a 1/4 inch piece of MDF. Then I can drill holes where I want to store each chisel slightly larger than the thickness of the MDF. Once I install the two planks with a gap, this will create the cradles for each chisel. Besides the clamps, there was nothing keeping the planks together, so I drilled slowly to prevent them from shifting. Right, so that's pretty much the chisel storage and organizer unit, and at this point it is fairly or quite effective, and with the cradles the chisels can't move up and down the slide. I do want to make one more addition, which is a piece of plexiglass in the front to protect the chisels and also prevent me from bumping up against them, while still giving me the ability to identify which chisel is which. So to cover the chisels when they are stored, I cut up a piece of plexiglass just like I did with my pegboard, and I'm now going to install this on the front of the unit. And that's my chisels stored and organized. As a little bit of a bonus, I also made one for my lathe chisels, which was a lot simpler because I didn't need the slot. Instead, I took the thickest part of the handle and drilled a hole slightly smaller. Then with my trim router, I cleaned up the edge, and I've got a storage unit for my lathe chisels as well. Right, so there's 5 more super simple shop organizers from scrap wood, and it really goes a long way in organizing my small workshop. But that is all I have time for today, so I'm going to have to end off the video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, let me know in the comments down below. And if you're not subscribed yet and you want to see what I get up to in my workshop in the future, you should do that now. As always, thank you so much for watching. Until next time, cheers.